Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Jeffress, and I'm a solutions architect at Amazon Alexa. And I'm really excited today to kick off the tools portion of Alexa Live. And we're going to get started with building your first Alexa skill. And to do that, we created a skill called Cakewalk. And Cakewalk celebrates your birthday. When you open the skill, you tell it your birthday, and it will count down the number of days until your next birthday. And then if you interact with it on the day of your birthday, it will wish you happy birthday. So let's take a look at how we're going to build this. But before we do that, we need to get an understanding of what happens when you interact with an Alexa skill. And so here we have a diagram of that. And so when the user says the wake word, Alexa springs into action and starts listening to what the user says. And that audio gets captured and uploaded into the cloud where the Alexa service is. And we have speech recognition and machine learning and natural language understanding that takes place to figure out what the user said. And all of this stuff is pretty complicated. There's lots of artificial intelligence that's going on in machine learning. But one of the great things about Alexa Skills Kit is you don't actually have to have a deep knowledge of how this stuff works. You just have to provide what we call training data for that dictates how this is going to work. So you have a skill that has this interaction model, and it figures out what the user's intent is, and it wraps it up into a request and sends it to their service. And then your service unpacks that JSON and figures out what it's supposed to do with it, and then it packages that response into JSON and sends it back to the Alexa cloud. And then the Alexa cloud takes that and converts it from text into speech and sends it back to the Alexa device for Alexa to speak the response. And you'll also see that there is a spot on there for visual, so you can have various visual elements as well through the Alexa presentation language. We're not going to cover Alexa presentation language today. So now that we understand how it works, let's talk about designing a skill. So you want to start with designing for a conversation. When you're first coming over from, say, this is your first time doing anything with voice, but you've done stuff with screens, there might be some temptation to continue doing some of those things that you would do with the screen. But there is no screen, so you have to think about how it works with conversation. And so here's our conversation that we have with Cakewalk. So we have a situation here where the birthday is unknown. So this is the first time we're interacting with the skill. And so the user says, Alexa, open Cakewalk. And then Alexa responds, hello, welcome to Cakewalk. What's your birthday? And then the user says, I was born November 7th, 1983. And Alexa then responds, thanks. I'll remember that you were born November 7th, 1983. So that's our first interaction. And then you can see in the case where we have the birthday is known, this is the second time the user interacts with the skill. User says, Alexa, open Cakewalk. Alexa responds, welcome back. There are 219 days until your 36th birthday. So you can see these are our two main interactions. So I have a quick question for you. Who led this conversation? Was it Alexa or the customer? Well, if you chose Alexa, you'd be wrong. It's actually the user. If you look at these, we can put a square around the two pieces, the user and Alexa, and you can see the user says something and Alexa responded in each case. And so you can box these up and create turns. We can also take a look and note what the situation is. In this case, the birthday is unknown. And then we can represent each one of these with a card. On these cards, we can show the entire turn. So we can show, okay, the utterance was open Cakewalk, the situation was birthday unknown, and then our response is actually split up into two different pieces. We have the response, in this case, we're saying, hello, welcome to Cakewalk, and then we have a prompt. That's the question that we're going to ask, what's the birthday? And that question is going to change based upon the situation, and that's why we split those two pieces up. So in our first turn, we're also able to identify that the response is hello, welcome to Cakewalk, and that our prompt is what is your birthday? So then when we get to the next turn in the conversation, we're able to identify that the birthday is now known. So you can see when we first wrote out the script, we could only put at the very beginning that this whole situation is unknown. But with being able to break each one of these things up into cards, we're able to determine the exact part in the conversation at when the birthday becomes known. We're also able to identify the information that we need to collect. So if you notice, there's those red lines there We're going to call those slots. And so that's the information we need to capture. We're going to capture a month, a day, and a year. And then we have Alexa speak back what the user said as an implicit confirmation of what the user said. And this is really great because if you build out these cards, over time you have this like deck that represents what the user can say to interact with your skill. And then you can combine these together to build different scenarios. And so these are your parts of your storyboard. And what's great is if you determine that, oh, wow, I said something that isn't part of my deck of cards, then you know that you need to go back and create another card, which will become another turn in your conversation. So that is how situational design works in this particular piece. And so today, we're going to build Cakewalk in these 4 steps. So we're going to go through, we're going to build a skill in 5 minutes. Then we're going to learn how to collect the information. That's how we're going to collect those slots. Then we're going to add memory to Cakewalk because we need to remember their birthday. It would not be a very good experience if every single time we interacted with the skill, we had to give it our birthday. So we're going to have Cakewalk memorize that. And then we're going to use the settings API to access the time zone of the device. So that way we can give a more accurate calculation of how many days it is until their next birthday. So before we dive into that, I just want to quickly explain how we use the SDK. There's some core concepts that you need to have a good understanding of. And so requests are being sent to your skill. And so you have in your code handlers that handle those requests. And so the handlers are composed of a canHandle function and a handle function. So the handle function returns true or false whether or not it can return or handle the request. So it basically looks to see like what type of request is it? Is it a launch request? Is it an intent request? What's the name of the request? Depending upon that information, it will return true or false. And if it returns true, then the handle method will actually be what runs. And that is the code that handles the request. So now that we have an understanding of how the SDK works at a basic level, we're going to go through and actually build Cakewalk. So we're going to start with just building the skill. So I'm going to exit out of my presentation here and open up and go to developer.amazon.com in the browser. I'm going to go ahead and click on Alexa here. And you'll see here it says sign in. I'm going to sign in. And once I sign in, it'll take me to this page here. And you'll see up at the top, there's some navigation. We have Alexa. So I mouse over that and I select Alexa Skills Kit. So doing so, that opens up the Alexa Developer Console. And you can see here, we've got a nice little area here where I don't have any skills yet created on this account. So I've got nothing here. So I can either click this Create Skill button here or over here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Create Skill. And this brings up the Create Skill page. So I'm going to take, and in the skill name section, type in Cakewalk. So this is going to be my skill's name. It's also going to be my skill's invocation name. So when I interact with the skill, I'll need to say open Cakewalk. And so that's how that's going to open. And we're going to use custom model. There's a bunch of different ways or different types of skills that you can create. And I suggest you take a look at those and research them on your own. Today we're going to use a custom experience. So we're going to leave that to custom. And then the last option here says, to choose a method to host your skills backend resources. You can either provision your own or use Alexa hosted. We're going to use Alexa hosted. There are some benefits to using both. There's a link here that says learn more. I suggest you click on that and take a look at it. But what's one of the cool things about using Alexa hosted is you're able to host your skills backend in the developer console. So you don't have to go back and forth between, say, AWS and the Alexa developer console. So it's really nice. And so we're going to use that for today. So I'm going to select that and scroll up to the top and select Create Skill. And then this is going to go through and provision everything I need for my skill. OK, so this is going to provision everything I need for my skill. So right now it's creating the voice model. It's also going to provision the AWS resources. And in doing so, it's going to set up my IAM roles. It's going to create the AWS Lambda function. It's going to create an S3 bucket. And so this is going to do all this stuff for me. So if I wasn't using Alexa hosted, I would have to go to AWS myself and configure all of this. So this makes it a lot easier. And so now it says preparing the code editor. That usually indicates that that's the last step in this process. So we're almost done. And so once this is ready to go, we arrive here on the main page for building our skill. And you can see at the top here, we've got a bunch of different tabs. We've got build, code, test, distribution, certification, and analytics. Today, we're going to be looking mainly at build, code, and test. If we were to publish a skill, you would go to distribution and certification, and analytics is where you would figure out how many people are using your skill and some other various information that would help you improve your experience. So what we're going to do is, also you'll notice here we have our checklist, and we've got these nice green check marks to indicate that these items have been done for us. And because we're using Alexa hosted, this has been configured for us automatically. So we don't have to worry about that information being filled out manually ourselves. So we're good. We're able to skip some steps here. So I'm going to go ahead and open the code tab in another window, so that way I don't have to keep jumping back and forth. So I've opened this up. What we're going to do is we're going to change the welcome message. Right now it says welcome. You can say hello or help. Which would you like to try? And I have this already saved in another file here. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste on top of here. But you can see here we've got our launch request handler. This is the code that's going to handle a launch request. You can see we've got handler input.request-envelope.request.type equals launch request. So we're able to check our launch request there. And in our handle method, we're just going to set the speech text to say, welcome to Cakewalk. That was a piece of cake. Goodbye. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And then we need to deploy this. So once this has been deployed, we'll be able to actually test our skill. So I'm going to wait for that to deploy. And while that's doing what it's going to do, actually, I don't need this one just yet for this test. I'm going to right-click and say open. And it will ask you if you want to have access to the microphone, because you can actually speak to the skill, or you can type. So I'm going to go ahead and type. But before I do that, I'm going to enable testing. So I'm going to select development here. And what I'm going to do is say open Cakewalk. So Alexa responds, hello, welcome to Cakewalk. That was a piece of cake. Bye. So we have the first part of our skill. So we have actually completed building our skill in 5 minutes. So now we're going to move on to collecting our information turn by turn. So one of the great things about, or one of the challenges with conversation is that we might ask what's their birthday, and the user might come back and say, I was born November 1983. They didn't give us the day, they just gave us the month and the year. They could also say, I was born on November 7th. They don't give us the year in that case. So we need to come up with some follow-up questions. And so here we have some situational design cards that show the case where they tell us the month and the day, but they don't give us the year. And so what we would do here is we just create another card, and we come back and ask them, on our middle card here, we say, I was born in 2015. What year were you born? And then the user comes back and gives the answer. So we're able to capture that. So we need to capture that information. We're going to use auto-delegation. So here's the 4 steps that you would do to activate auto-delegation. We're going to define our slots. We're going to mark them required. We're going to define some prompts, and then we're going to choose a delegation strategy. So let's go ahead and do that. So to do that, we're going to go to our build tab, and I'm going to delete this hello world intent because I don't need it. I'm going to create a new intent, and I'm going to call it capture birthday intent. I'm going to create a custom intent, and I'm going to say I was born on November 7th, 1983. Okay, now if I were to hit enter, we would be able to capture this, but we won't be able to capture everyone's birthday. So we're going to need to convert these into slots. So I'm going to go ahead and double click this, enter in month here. We're going to change this and convert it to day. And I'm going to take this, I'm going to convert it to year. Okay, and then if I press enter, you'll notice it converted these into nice little colors that indicate that there are slots, and they're surrounded by curly braces. So we can also say something like month, day, We can also do month, year. We can also do month, day, year. Okay, so this will allow us to capture some variances in the response. We also need to add a slot type to it, and this will help the automatic speech recognition engines figure out what the user said. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to choose, and we're going to use some built-in slot types for this. So for month, we're going to use month. For day, we're actually going to use ordinal, because this allows us to say the 1st, the 7th, the 23rd. And then for year, there is no built-in year slot, but we're going to use 4-digit number. This will allow us to be able to say things like 2015 or 1947. So we'll go ahead and add that in. And so now, in order to make sure that we're going to use auto-delegation and to capture those slots, we're going to make these required. So I'm going to click on the slot, and you'll see here it says slot filling is a slot required to fulfill the intent. I'm going to go ahead and flip that switch, and you'll notice these things pop up that says Alexa speech prompts. This is the question that you would ask the user to fill this slot. So this is our month slot. So I'm going to say I was born in November. What month were you born? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and copy this because I'm going to use a similar variation for each one. So if I hit enter, that's going to save that. Now, user utterances, we could put in basically our utterance or our slot that we want to capture. So I'm just going to say month. I'm going to now go back to the intent. I'm going to repeat that for day and year. So we're going to make that required. I'm going to paste this in. I'm going to change this to on the 6th. I'm using November 6th, which is the date that Alexa was released. This is the day. Oops, not DAG, day. And I'm going to enter in my slot here. And now we're going to do our last, which is the year. Make it required. Paste that in, change this to 2015. Oh, and also you'll have to spell that out. So type that in. What year? Oops, we need a period. What year were you born? Okay. Oh, gotta hit enter. Okay, put the year. I'm gonna hit save model, and we're gonna build our model. So that will create the training that we need. So we've now created our model. We've got the slots defined. Now we need to update our skill to be able to handle that request. So first of all, we don't need this hello world intent handler because we got rid of the hello world intent. So we're just gonna go ahead and delete that. And I'm gonna go to my code here that I have saved, and I'm gonna just copy and paste this new handler here, and I'll talk about what we're doing here. But the other thing I need to do is I need to change the question that we ask. So instead of saying, that was a piece of cake, goodbye, I'm gonna say, I was born November 6th, or sorry, I'm gonna say, what is your birthday? So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this, paste it over. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and save, before I deploy, forgot one thing. I need to register my intent handler. So at the bottom here, you can see we've got Alexa skill builders.custom. We have add request handlers. I need to replace the hello world intent handler that I deleted with the new one that I created called capture birthday intent handler. So now if we click save and deploy, we'll be able to test our skill and capture their birthday. So now that we have that deployed, it's going to deploy. It's going to take a little bit. I'm going to run my test. So I'm going to reopen this cakewalk, and the skill is going to open up. And you'll notice this time, instead of saying that was a piece of cake, goodbye, it says, what's your birthday? So I'm going to go ahead and paste in my birthday here. Notice I'm spelling out the digits here. When you speak with the skill, you don't have to spell it. You just say I was born November 7th, 1983. But when you're typing in the simulator, you need to spell out the letters, or spell it out in letters. So hit enter, and you'll see she responds, thanks, I'll remember that you were born November 7th, 1983. Cool. So at this point, we have built out the skill, and I'll just point out in our capture birthday intents can handle method, we are looking at to see if the type is an intent request and if the intent is capture birthday intent. And then in our handle function, we're accessing the value of our slots by doing this, by saying handler input.request envelope.request.intent.slots day, month, year, and then we're doing .value. And then we're capturing those and putting them in the string that says, thanks, I'll remember when you were born. So now we're going to move on to the next part where we're going to add memory to Cakewalk. And to add memory to Cakewalk, we're going to need three things. We're going to need a node module for the persistence adapter. We're going to need to use the adapter. And then we're going to need to use the attributes manager. And what that's going to do for us is we're going to save into a file that's going to be stored in S3 with this information here, the year, month, and day. So let's go ahead and do that. I have the code for that here. So we're going to first need to update our package.json file. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. This is if I go to the package.json file at the end of this list where it says dependencies, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this and I'm going to click deploy. And the reason why I'm going to click deploy is because it's going to take a little while to download all the modules. So it's going to take a little bit of time to do that. So I'm going to set that up, and then as I'm waiting for that to deploy, I'm going to go ahead here and enter and require the persistence adapter. So this ask SDK S3 persistence adapter is what we just imported into our project. So I'm going to be able to access it in code by importing it in. And then I need to register my persistence adapter. So I'm going to copy this code. We're going to move to the bottom, and we're going to basically define this here. So now on our custom skill builder, we've added a persistence adapter, and we're using our S3 persistence adapter. So that allows us to connect to our database. So now that we have that, we need to now save the information. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this code here, and I'll talk about what we're doing after I've added it. So if we go to our capture birthday intent, we're going to need to save the information. So before we speak it out, we're going to paste this code in here. And so we're accessing the attributes manager, so the handler input.attributes manager. And then we're building this object here called birthday attributes. And we are setting the properties year, month, and day. And then we're calling the set persistent attributes and passing it our birthday attributes. And then we're calling save persistent attributes on the attributes manager to save that information into S3. You'll notice we're getting an error here that says that it's an unexpected token. It's because we're using this await function here, or actually it's a keyword, which means we need to have an asynchronous function wrapping around it. So we're just going to change this to say async handle. So that now the error goes away, and I'm going to go ahead and click save and deploy. And now if we test our skill, it's actually going to save the information into S3. So let's take a look at how that will look like. So I'm going to say open Cakewalk. And I'm going to paste in the birth date. And we've said that we're going to remember it. And at this point, we should have remembered it. So how do we check that? We're going to go back to our code tab. If you look at the bottom here, it says media storage S3. If you click on that, that will open up into another tab and log us into the S3 console here. And if I click on this link here in the breadcrumbs, it'll pop me up into the bucket for my skill. And you can see here, there's this file, and it's named after the user ID. So if I were to download this and look at the file, it would have the contents of the birthday, November 7th, 1983. So I won't open up that file, but if you were to download it, you could check it out on your own and see that it's actually saving the information there. So now that we are actually saving that information, we need to access that information. And we're going to need to access that information from several different places. We need to access it from our can handle and our handle function. And we don't want to have to make that call out to S3 multiple times. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create an interceptor. And we're going to register that interceptor. And so every request that comes in, we're going to load that only once. So that way we don't have to keep loading it over and over and over again. So we get it once per request. So that's what this code's doing. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this and paste it to the bottom here. And I'll walk through what it does as soon as I finish getting this in here. So once we've created the interceptor, we also have to register it just as we did our our handler. So I'm going to copy this code and register it by pasting this here into this, the custom skill builder. So we did add request interceptors, we loaded, and we passed it our load birthday interceptor. So our load birthday interceptor has a function called process, and it basically goes through, it uses the attributes manager to get the persistent attributes. And then what we're doing through is we're looking through each of the attributes for month, year, month, and day. And if it has a value, we use it. And if we don't have a value, we're going to set it to 0. So if it's the first time using the skill, the attributes are going to be 0. And then lastly, what we're doing is we're checking to see if there's a year, month, and a day. If we have all of those values, we're going to use session attributes, which session attributes don't get saved. As soon as the skill exits, those values go away. And we're going to do that so that way we only have to load from persistent attributes once and then per request. So we don't have to keep accessing over and over and over again, which could help hurt performance if you keep loading the same things unnecessarily. Okay, so we're actually able now to save this. We're able to access the information. Now we need to do is create another handler that handles the case where the user opens the skill and we know their birthday. So I happen to have some code here that does that. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, paste it in, and then walk you through what the code's doing, and then we'll test it. So I'm going to go back now and paste this in. And you don't have to really worry about the order in which you paste your handlers into the code, but you do have to think about how the order that you register them. Because what the SDK does is it goes through this list here, and it looks at the can handle function in order. And only the first handler to return true in this list is going to be the one that handles the request. So if I go to register the has birthday launch request handler and I put it after the launch request handler, it's not going to work because what will happen is the launch request handler only checks to see if it's a launch request, whereas the has birthday launch request handler checks to see if it has a birthday and it's a launch request. So you need to put your most restrictive checks first. So we're going to actually put that here. And so I'm going to just go ahead and save and deploy this. And while it's deploying, I'll talk through and walk what we're doing through this code. So in our has birthday launch request handler, what we're doing is we're using the attributes manager to get the session attributes. And notice we don't have to call await here because we're accessing the information in the JSON. We're not actually going to S3 and making a request that could take some time. And then we're checking to see if the type is a launch request and if we have a year, month, and day. If we do, then we're going to return true. And then on our handle function, we're going to use the attributes manager again to get the session attributes. And since we've loaded them up in the session attributes, we don't have to worry about, we're not loading them out of S3. So that's that optimization that we made. And then we are saying welcome back. It looks like there are X more days until your wife's birthday. So we're not actually computing the date here just yet. But we're at a point now where we can save and we can recall. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the simulator here. I'm going to exit out of the skill, and I'm going to rerun the skill. And you can see here, now that we have a birthday saved, the skill doesn't say, welcome to Cakewalk, what's your birthday? It says, welcome back. It looks like there are X more days until your wife's birthday. So what this means is we're on the homeward stretch. We have been able to basically save the information and access the information. We made an optimization using an interceptor to be able to cut down on the times that we're accessing S3. So let's now move toward the fourth section of today, which is we're going to use the settings API in order to be able to access the user's time zone. And this allows us to be able to figure out the number of days until their birthday in a more accurate way. So what we'll be able to do here is we'll actually be able to say, okay, their device time zone is set to New York, or maybe their device is located in PDT or in Asia somewhere. So you can see what their time zone is and then do a more accurate calculation of how many days until their next birthday. So we're going to use the settings API to do that. And here are the three things that we're going to need. we're going to need the device ID, because you can have multiple devices and you can set your time zones independently. And so I used to live in Japan, and so I actually have, and I speak Japanese, and so I actually have 2 different Echo devices on my desk. One is set to Japanese, and one is set to English, and the Japanese one has the Japanese time zone set, even though it's physically in the United States. When I speak to this, when I speak to it, I can get that device ID in code and see that, oh, the time zone is set to JST, and calculate things based upon the time zone that's set on that device. Then you're also going to need an API client. So the settings API is based upon, it's another web service that you have to call, and you call it from your skill. And the SDK provides a nice, easy way how to call the built-in Alexa web services. So we're going to use that. And then we're going to use the service client factory, and that's provided to you by the Node.js SDK. And so you can use that to facilitate looking up different settings. And so through the settings API, you have access to the time zone, the unit of measurements, so you can tell if they're set to like meters or feet. And then you can also check the temperature settings as well, so whether they're set to Celsius or Fahrenheit. So what's really cool about that is you can adapt your skill to your user. So this is a really helpful thing to make your skills a little bit more relatable and personable. If your skill is if your user is in Europe somewhere and they have their settings to meters, it would be good to come back and say a distance in meters, or if it's set to feet, say it in feet, or depending upon what their settings are. So you want to adapt to the user. So in Cakewalk, we're not looking at their units and their temperature, but we're basing it upon the time setting, and that's how we're going to calculate the number of days until their next birthday. So how do we get the device ID? So to get the device ID, luckily, it's provided to us in each and every request that comes to our skill. So here I have on the screen a mock-up of the request that comes to our skill, and in the blue, I've outlined the path that you're going to take. So we're going to go custom, system, device, device ID. So those are the different pieces that you're going to go through. You also notice we have a user ID as well. So that will allow us to identify, oh, it's this user and it's this device. So remember how I mentioned before, I have 2 different devices. I've got my one set to Japanese and JST time, and I have one set to English and Pacific time. And when I speak to the skill can identify, oh, it's Justin who's speaking to me. I'm in Justin's account, and I'm also speaking to, it's being accessed from the Japanese device, or it's being accessed from the device set to English and this time zone. So it's pretty neat. You can figure out this device ID. And so we're going to pass that device ID to our skill to the service client, and we're going to look that up. So to do that, I actually have some code here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to first update our API client. I'll go ahead and copy this, and we'll go back over to our code window. And I'm going to scroll to the bottom here. And you can see here we have our custom builder. We're going to keep adding onto this. I'm going to go ahead and add it to the bottom here. And you see here we have with API client and Alexa.default API client. So you can actually use your own API client, but we're going to use a default one that's built into the core SDK. So it saves us a lot of having to write our own code. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. And then what we're going to do is in our has birthday launch request handler, we're going to access the device ID, and we're going to use the service client factory. So I'm going to go up to our has birthday launch request handler. And here I've got these 2 to-dos here. I'm going to go ahead underneath this and paste in the code that I just copied here. So we have now our service client factory, and we have our device ID. And so we're accessing the service client factory by doing handler input dot service client factory. And then we're accessing our device ID by doing handler input.requestEnvelope.context.system.device.device ID. And that is basically what we have outlined here on this slide in the response. So you can see context, system, device, device ID. I can also show you in the console here. Here's the request, and we have our context, system, device, device ID. You can see it's this really long string, AMZ and one.ask.device, and then this nice, really long string. There's no way you're going to be able to memorize that, but you can capture that in the request. And one of the great things is it's included in every request that comes to your skill, so you can tell the difference between which device that they're accessing the skill from, and you can get the specific settings for that device. So what we're going to do now is go back to our code, and we're going to look up the time zone. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this code into our has birthday intent request, and then I'll go through and explain what we're doing here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete these to-do comments because we're going to do them now. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that, and I'm going to paste right here some code, and we're going to get an error message, but I'll explain what's going on, and we'll fix that. So here we have our time zone that we're going to capture, and we have this try-catch block, and we have the UPS service client, and we're calling get UPS service client. So that's going to create the service client. Remember how at the bottom of the code here, we defined this API client, and we pass it. So calling that get client function is going to use the client that we defined at the bottom of the skill in our code and initiate that object for us. And then we're going to call get system time zone, and we're going to pass it the device ID. And this is a web service request, so it's going to take some time. So it's going to be an asynchronous call. And so notice we have this await keyword that'll allow us to wait for that information to come back for us. So we need to make our handle function asynchronous. So I'm just going to type in async. And if you need any more information about how async and await works, you can go search for it online. There are some very good, really easy to understand explanations about how that works. But if you're going to make some sort of request that takes a while to prevent the Node.js runtime from stalling, things get put on another tick of the runtime loop to execute. And so you either need to pass like a callback or a promise, but that can get really, really complicated because your code can get nested. And so using the async await gets rid of that nesting, and it makes it much more cleaner. So we call await, and we make our asynchronous handle, our handle function asynchronous by using the async keyword. So I'm going to go ahead and save and deploy this. Notice we've wrapped this in a try-catch. What will happen here is if there is an error that happens while we're getting the system time zone, it will be thrown, and our catch will catch it. And so we're going to log that there was a service error and have Alexa speak that there was a problem, and we're also going to log it to our log. So we shouldn't have any errors unless I mess something up, but we're going to go ahead and reopen the skill, and you'll notice we have a log here that says console.log user time zone. So we're actually going to be able to see what the time zone is set for the simulator right now. So I'm going to go ahead and type in open cakewalk. And once this loads, she still says, welcome back. Looks like there's X more days until your wife's birthday. But we need to see where did that log go, right? We have some code statement here that says, console.log. Where do we view this log? Well, we view that in CloudWatch. And if you notice, just like before when we accessed S3, if we go to the left-hand side and we look at the bottom here, it says Logs, Amazon CloudWatch. If you click that, it will open up another tab. And in this tab, we can see the different logging groups. And so for each save and deploy that we do, you get all of your stuff broken up into different logs groups. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this group here, and because that was the top one, that was the most recent. And you'll see here it says user time zone, America, New York. So the time zone of the simulator is New York. So it's going to do the calculations based upon that. So that's great. We're able to capture the time zone setting. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do some complicated date math here. So the complex date math is pretty complicated. I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to paste this in under here, and here being underneath my console log statement for the user time zone. And there are better and different ways to do this. And so if you take a look at my code and you're like, oh man, there's such an easier way to calculate the number of days, please like optimize it. And I'm gonna share the link with you where this code is available, so that way you can take a look at it afterward. And you can always tweet at me at Sleepy Developer on Twitter and let me know, hey, I optimized your code. I'm very, very welcome to that. So please do that. And in pasting this in, we got a parsing error because we're redefining our speech text. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that because we don't need to redefine that. And so I'll go over a little bit of what we're doing here. So we have a constant here that we set up for 1 day. We're multiplying the number of hours by the number of minutes, by the number of seconds, by the number of, I think that's milliseconds. Then we're getting the current date time. For those of you who are familiar with how dates work in computers, they're stored the number of seconds from a certain date. I think it's from 1972, if I'm not mistaken. It's called epoch time. And so we're calculating the number of seconds. We get the current date. We're passing it our time zone here that we captured above when we use the service client. And then we're doing a bunch of different things like logging the current date, current time. I won't go through excruciating detail about everything here, but we're calculating what their next birthday is. And then we're checking to see like if their next birthday is in the future or in the past. If so, then we need to bump the year up by 1. And then what we're doing here is we're setting our default speech text to be happy birthday. And we're entering in, what we're doing here is we're saying current year minus year. So that's going to give us the age that they're going to turn, right? So since I was born in 1983, it's going to take 2019 minus 1983 and substitute that math in there for 36. Yes, I know I'm dating myself. And then in the if statement here, we're checking to see if it's not their birthday. We're going to overwrite that and say, welcome back. It looks like there are, and we compute the number of days until their next one. And we tell them what their next birthday is going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and save and deploy this. And once I deploy this, we're going to run the skill. And it should tell me how many days until my 36th birthday. So I'm just going to wait for that to finish deploying, and it just finished. So I'm going to go ahead now, and you notice our last message, it said welcome back. It looks like there were X more days. This time it should actually tell us how many days. So this is exciting. I'm going to go ahead and paste this in, and drum roll. Here we have welcome back. Looks like there's 197 days until your 36th birthday. Cool. All right, so we now have a working skill. So what did we just do? We just built pet match, or sorry, not pet match. It's another skill I built. We built Cakewalk, and we're able to capture their birthday and calculate the number of days until their next birthday. So all of the materials for Cakewalk are available online. You can go to alexa.design/cake-walk. And you can take a look at the code. There's also a step-by-step set of instructions on how to get this up and working. And I want to say thank you so much for tuning in. And please take a look at the survey and enter the raffle. And if you have any questions about today, you can reach me on Twitter at Sleepy Developer.